In 1995, Walt Disney Pictures partnered with Pixar Animation Studios and released a movie called Toy Story. It's a movie about a young child named Andy and his toys. And his toys come alive when he's not around. And Andy does not realize that his toys greatly enjoy their relationship. They love being played with. They love it. They love it so much that birthdays and Christmases were a threat to them. They were constantly lived in fear that Andy would be given a new toy that would take their place and become his new favorite toy. They were scared. And of course, this is exactly what happens in the movie. And all throughout the first movie and the second story, which was the second movie, creative name, Toy Story 2, was released in 1999. And all throughout those two movies, there's this worry going around of these toys that they were going to be replaced. You see, they did not want their relationship to change. They didn't want it. And this theme of not wanting their relationship to change is captured so well in the song that is the theme song for the whole series, entitled You Got a Friend in Me by Randy Newman. This is the theme song for all of the Toy Story movies. Much of the plot is these toys doing whatever they can do to try to prevent their relationship with their owner from changing. They didn't want anybody else to take their place. But in life, no matter how much we resist it, throughout life, relationships do change. They change. And when we come to Genesis 33, we're at a point where Jacob is right in the middle of every relationship basically in his life besides his immediate family. He's in the middle of a relationship change. Now, when we say relationships, for this whole chapter, we're not talking about marriage here. We're talking about friends, extended family, even family, but not marriage. So when we talk about relationship, we're talking about relationships, not a marriage relationship. Genesis 33 is not about marriage. So this whole lesson today, when we go through this, don't think about marriage. It's not about marriage, but it is about relationships. Jacob's at the point where his relationships are changing. He was first born with his mom and dad, and he was not known for having good relationships. He ruined his relationship with his big brother Esau by stealing the blessing from him. He stressed his relationship with his dad by lying to him and pretending to be his brother. So then he left and he went to his uncle. He's going to have a good relationship there, right? His uncle was a scoundrel. Nobody had a good relationship with Laban. Nobody. He was such a manipulator. And so the time finally came where God does a work in Jacob's heart, and God actually works in Laban's heart, and he actually appears to Laban, an unbeliever, and says, "You leave Jacob alone." And he appears to Jacob and said, "Jacob, get out of there. Go back to the promised land. Go back to Canaan." On his journey there, he's scared because he's going to meet his brother he ran from. He ran from his life when Esau found out, rewinding back to Jacob's life, when Esau found out that he has stolen the blessing from him, he said, "You wait. When our dad dies, you're going to have to dig your own grave because I'm going to kill you right after our dad dies." After Jacob leaves Laban, guess who's waiting to meet him? Esau, his brother. This strikes great fear in Jacob. He finds out that Jacob is coming with 400 men. Jacob was scared. All night he spent wrestling with God. God touched his hip and gave him a limp, injured Jacob, so he could not run away from Esau. So God isn't doing something right here. He not only just finished separating Jacob from his uncle Laban, It's time to end that relationship. He teaches Jacob a lesson in that wrestling, said, the only thing you can do is trust me. You have to depend on me, he's telling Jacob. And now, he brings Esau into his life again. That's where we pick up in Genesis 33, verse 1. And Jacob lifted up his eyes, excuse me, and Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. Oh boy. Last thing he knew, Esau was getting ready to kill him. Now he's coming with 400 men. What does he do? Jacob defaults into his manipulative ways. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants, and he put the servants and their children in front, then Leah and her children, and then Rachel and Joseph last of all. He was hiding. He said, I want Esau to see everybody else first. Let him see the children. Let his heart get soft. And then let him meet all the family, and at the end, he's going to meet me. But evidently, he changed his mind because in verse 3, he himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times as he came near his brother. So Jacob sees Esau coming with 400 men. He didn't just hear of his servants telling him he's coming. No, this time he actually looks and he sees him. So he's close. The confrontation is about to take place. Jacob is probably thinking right now, he's about to die. Puts the children in front, puts his wives in front, and says, okay, never mind, I'll just face him. So he goes and comes near his brother. Look what happens. Verse 4. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. What a scene. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, who are these with you? Jacob said, the children that God has graciously given your servant. Jacob is still sucking up to Esau. He's saying, I'm your servant. Then the servants drew near, and they and their children, and bowed down. Likewise, Leah and their children drew near and bowed down. And last, Joseph and Rachel draw near, and they bowed down. And Esau said, what do you mean by all this company that I meet? Now remember, Jacob sent servants with all these gifts beforehand to Esau. We covered that last week. As talked about in the last chapter, Genesis 32. And now Esau's asking, hey, what's with all this stuff you're giving me here? What do you mean by all of this company that I met? Jacob answered, to find favor in the sight of my Lord. But Esau said, I have enough, brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Evidently, it's starting to come to light here that God has not just worked in Jacob's life, God has actually worked in Esau's heart as well. Esau has learned to forgive, and he's refusing the gift. He fell on his neck. So basically what's happening in verses 4 through 15 is Esau shows that he has forgiven Jacob by embracing him. He runs to him in verse 4. He fell on his neck and hugged him in verse 4. He kissed him in verse 4. He refuses gifts, said, oh, you're going to give me all these gifts? Brother, I don't want any gifts. You keep them for yourself. Jacob was insistent. He ends up saying, fine, I'll take them. Look at verse 15. Actually, let's look at verse 12. Then Esau said, after he took the gift, verse 12, then Esau said, let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you. So also, Esau is inviting Jacob, hey, why don't we travel together? I want to spend time with you, brother. Esau has forgiven Jacob. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that all of my children are frail, and the nursing flocks and the herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, my flocks will die. In other words, he's saying, my company is not as healthy as yours. We can't keep up with you. You go ahead first, and then I'll come. Verse 15. So Esau said, well, if we have to separate, let me leave you with some of the people who are with me. In other words, hey, if you don't want to travel together, that's fine. I'll go ahead, but let me leave you some people to protect you. because you sound vulnerable. Esau is being overly generous. You see, God did a work in Esau's heart. In no way does this make Esau a believer in God, but it is possible for even unbelievers to have their heart softened. And that's exactly what's happening here. So Esau shows that he's forgiven Jacob by embracing him. Verses 4 through 15. And 16 through the rest of the chapter, through verse 20. So Esau returned that way on his way, and Esau went to the place he was going to. But Jacob was not supposed to go to where Esau was going back to. Jacob was supposed to go back to Canaan. Canaan is the promised land. All right? Verse 17, but Jacob sojourned to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. And so he called the name of that place Succoth, which means booths. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, so he's continuing to travel, which is in the land of Canaan, of his way from Padan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money a piece of land, and he pitched his tent. And he erected an altar and called it, my Bible says, El Elohe Israel. In Hebrew, it's Elohim Israel. Elohim is the name of God, and then Israel we'll get to in a minute. So that's the chapter. That's this whole narrative of Esau, Jacob and Esau. A reconciliation takes place. Now, if you were to consider this chapter just alone, you would be tempted to come to a conclusion, an application of maybe like, well, we should always reconcile every one of our relationships with other people. Unfortunately, that's not possible. We know it's not possible because, remember, Laban was unreconcilable. And God actually said, you can't reconcile that relationship. You have to separate there. Then he teaches Jacob to depend on God alone. Hey, I'm going to give you a limp. You have nothing to do but cling to me. I'm going to force you. Jacob, I am going to force you to meet with your brother, and I'm going to give you a limp and give you an injury so you can't run away from him. And the only thing you can do is depend on me. Then God facilitates this reconciliation between Jacob and Esau. You see, true reconciliation can only take place if God works in the heart of both parties. And true reconciliation is a result of divine work. It is God's business. It's God's work. So that leads to the question, in your life and in my life today, how do you know which relationships are like Laban that can't be reconciled, and which relationships are like Esau that need to be reconciled? You ever wonder that? How do we know? How do we know the difference between a Laban and an Esau? Well, here's a clue. If they're willing to reconcile with you with strings attached, they're not an Esau, they're a Laban. Laban was unwilling to believe in God, or Laban was unwilling to allow forgiveness to abound. Laban was consumed with his own selfishness. And that's why God actually separated Jacob and Laban, his uncle. And then God spoke to Jacob and Laban individually. Laban, you stay away. Jacob, you leave. God spoke to Jacob individually. Hey, Esau's coming, and I'm going to make it so you can't run from him. And meanwhile, God also did a work in the heart of Esau to forgive. So what does this all mean? What is God doing? When you consider not just chapter 33, but the events before that, what is God doing in Jacob's life? God is guiding Jacob, and God is changing his relationships. And when you consider your own life, God will do just that. Throughout your life, there will be periods of time where God will change your relationships. You see, God designed your human relationships to change so you can focus on God who never changes. He designed relationships in your life to change over time so you can focus on God who never changes. He designed life to have relationships that change. What do we mean by this? Once again, it's not talking about marriage here. It's talking about life relationships. But if we're honest today, we have to admit relationships can be scary. How? How can they be scary? Everybody from the time they're 5 years old, probably even before, all the way through the moment of death, if you live to be 110 years old, it doesn't matter. Relationships are scary. Because even at a very young age, the words that strike fear deep in the bone of every child, adolescent, and teenager, you know the 3 words that every child never wants to hear? We are moving. Why? Because it means they start over on all their relationships. You move, you go to a new school district. Bye to all of your old friends. Those words strike fear into the bones of every child. We're moving. People resist change in relationships. We do our whole life. We resist it. If we're honest, we're like those toys in Toy Story. We don't want change. We don't want relationships to change. But it's a part of life. Relationships change. Moving usually requires changing schools. It's very hard for any person in grade school. For a child, changing schools is the biggest nightmare because it means starting over on all of your relationships. For me, and look back in my life, you know what was really scary? Graduating high school. I was ready. But to be honest, in a lot of ways, I was scared to death. It was scary to me because when you go to high school, it forces people into your life and relationships are built. But when high school ends, I didn't know which relationships are going to end on the last day of school. I didn't know which friends I was going to lose. It's scary, but it's a dynamic of life. Relationships change. Then you enter the college phase, going to college. Ooh, relationships change, especially if you move away to go to college. You say bye to a lot of your friends. And yeah, they're still your friends. They follow you on TikTok. But it's not the same. We still use the word friend. But if we're honest, we have to say that relationship changed. And new relationships are built. I went to college, I went in California. I knew when I crossed the Mississippi, I did not know a single person on that side of the Mississippi River. Changes. You can look back in your life and probably pick out some times where some relationships in your life changed. Chances are you either went to college, if not, you probably had some friends that went to college, and your relationship with them changed. It's not just for young people, though, even as adults. After college, getting your first job usually requires a relocation or a career, and with that new career comes new relationships, new friends, new coworkers. And then you start a family. Boy, does that change relationships. See, some people, after you get married, some of your old friends can expect to spend the same amount of time with you as we were single. And they don't understand, when you get married, your relationships change. It changes. It's a whole new dynamic. It's a whole new world. When you're married, you no longer have that kind of time. Yes, they're still your friends, but it's a different kind of friend. Relationships change. All throughout life, you have new job opportunities. Whenever you resign a role, you lose relationships. And anytime you start a new job, you gain new relationships in that new job. How about when the kids graduate and move out of the house and you become an empty nester? Boy, relationships change there too, with your own children. Then they start making their own decisions, and before you know it, they're married off, and you're still their mom, you're still their dad, but it's not the same mom as, at least it shouldn't be, the same mom and dad as when they were living in your house. Relationships change. Then comes retirement. And this is also why it's very common for people to run from retirement. The statistic is getting smaller and smaller of the amount of people that retire and stay retired because they miss the relationships they had came with their occupation. For some, they can't retire because they're not ready to downsize their relationships. They know that when you retire, you're going to lose some relationships for some coworkers, some camaraderie. So for some, choosing not to retire or retiring several times and going back, and it's not a finance thing, it's a social thing. They're not willing to make the social change that comes along with that life stage. That's why many decide to go back to work. So what do you do when you're in a season of life when God is changing your relationships? Relationships change. God made life. He created the dynamic of having children, raising them going out. Relationship changing is not a bad thing. It's from God. But that doesn't mean it's easy. It's hard. What do you do when you're in a season of life like Jacob here, where God is at work changing his relationships? Here's one thing you can do. Follow the direction of God in your relationships. Follow the direction of God. You see, there will be some relationships that you want to hang on to in life, but you need to let go. God designed relationships to change. It's from Him. There are some relationships that you need to embrace, even if that embracement requires forgiveness. That was Esau. You see, here was Jacob, had to say goodbye to Laban. And whether he realized it or not, whether he wanted to or not, he could do nothing but see his brother and attempt to reconcile that relationship. And here's Esau, who God was bringing Jacob back to him. He heard. And you know what? For Esau to meet, you know what it required of Esau? It required forgiveness. There will be some relationships in your life that you need to let go. There'll be some relationships in your life that you need to embrace, even if that embracement requires forgiveness. That's exactly what's happening here in Genesis 33. This is a terrific story about life, about the dynamics of life. Jacob had to apologize to Esau. What Jacob was doing by sending those gifts, see, I think that Jacob was more than just a manipulator. Was he a manipulator? Yes. Was he trying to manipulate Esau and soften his heart? Yes. But Jacob even knew after Esau came, fell on him, hugged him, kissed him, embraced him, he already knew he was forgiven. He knew, okay, Esau, look at this. Verse 4, look in your Bibles. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and catch this, and they wept. What a meeting that was. And they wept. Jacob, at this point, Jacob knew that Esau was not out to kill him anymore. At this point, Jacob knew that Esau has forgiven him. And yet Jacob is still saying, remember later on in the verses at 7 through 12, he's saying, hey, what do you mean by all these gifts? Jacob is like, I want you to keep them. I want you to keep them. Why? Jacob already knows he's forgiven him at that point, you see. What Jacob is trying to do is he's actually apologizing to Esau, saying, Esau, you're the reason why I have these gifts. I stole the birthright from you. The least I could do is try to give it back to you. That's what Jacob is doing there when he's insistent of trying to give the gifts back to Esau. Jacob is apologizing to Esau for stealing his blessing and stealing the birthright. Jacob had to apologize, and Esau had to forgive. Jacob was trying to give Esau all these gifts even after they met in an attempt to give him back his birthright. Esau told him, it's not necessary, brother, I just forgive you. So what does this mean for us? It means that the dynamic of your life, God is in control of. And there'll be seasons in life where your relationships will change. Your relationships with certain people will take upon different forms, and they will evolve. And that's the path God has put in your life. So follow the direction of God in your relationships. Your life is full of relationships that come and relationships that go. That's what life is. It's full of it. God made life that way. Maybe there's someone you need to let go today. Maybe there's someone you need to embrace. Maybe there's someone you need to be like Jacob and apologize. Maybe there's somebody in your life that you need to be like Esau and forgive. It's all the dynamics of relationships. And God is the one at work in Jacob's life right here. This is not, Jacob did not ask to be in this situation. God put him in this situation by giving him the limp and making sure he couldn't run. It's a dynamic of life. But boy, changing relationships and relationships evolving, it's not easy. They wept. They wept. Yet their relationship stayed peaceful for the rest of their lives. In Genesis 35, and 2 chapters from now, let's just glimpse this. Genesis 35, verse 28. Their dad's name was Isaac, and the days of Isaac were 180 years. And Isaac breathed his last, and he died, and was gathered to his people, old and full of days. And catch this, and his sons, Esau and Jacob, buried him. Jacob and Esau buried their father. You know what? Jacob was not in danger. Remember, Esau said, when our dad dies, you're going to die too. I'm going to kill you. That's not what you see. You see this peaceful reconciliation carried through the rest of their lives. God designed your human relationships to change, so you will focus on your relationship with Him who never changes. So first, don't resist changing relationships in life. God designed it that way. He designed life that way. Follow God's direction in your relationships. Second thing you can do here is keep a strong relationship with God. What makes changing relationships, these dynamics, so difficult? What makes it so difficult? Because what can happen in life is we can be more attached to people than we are to God. So keep a strong relationship with God. The stronger your relationship with God, the easier relationship transitions are with other people. Because God does not change. He's always there for you. That should be your most prioritized relationship above any other relationship. He is unchanging. Your relationship with God should never change. It should only get better. But I'm afraid there could be much relationship pain that we bring upon ourselves because sometimes we can get closer to other people than we are to God. And that's not their fault, and it's not God's fault. The good news is God is there for you. He's just as much there for you now as he's always been, and he desires you to confide in him alone. If you confide more in people than in God, you are in for a life of relationship pain and anguish. You will be like the toys in Toy Story who fear every birthday, fear every Christmas, because they don't want their relationships to ever change. But God designed our relationships to change. Perhaps God is using some relationships that are either separating or relationship complications. Perhaps God is using some of these situations in your life to get you to, like Jacob, focus on God. That's why Jacob had to wrestle with God. That's why he had to cling to God. Right in the middle of all of this, God said, Jacob, I want you to leave Laban. Now, I need some time with you alone. I'm going to teach you that your only hope is to cling to me. Remember, he wouldn't let go during the wrestling match. I'm not going to let go until you bless me. God was thinking, now you're learning. Now you're learning. You don't let go of me. You put me first, you can get through any relationship transition in life. Any. So do you confide more in a human relationship than in your relationship with God? It's not a coincidence that God taught Jacob to cling to him in the middle of all this relationship change. Keep a strong relationship with God. God is saying to Jacob in this passage, in this whole few chapters, God is saying to Jacob, Jacob, you're not going to be able to handle what I'm doing in your life on your own. You're not going to be able to handle this relationship change dynamic going on. Jacob, you need to put me first. You have to put me first. That's what he was teaching him when he wrestled with him. So keep a strong relationship with God. God will open doors for you, and he's going to close doors for you your entire life. Entire life. And with these doors are relationships that are opened and that are closed. With every door of life. Every one of these doors represent many relationships that God will open and God will close. So the truth is, most relationships are unique to seasons in life. I have guys that was my childhood best friend. Well, I mean 1st through 6th grade when I lived in Arcadia. Then I have a childhood best friend from 7th through 12th grade when I moved to Findlay. You see, they're still my friends, but they're different. Dynamics change. Most relationships are unique to seasons in life. That's why you cannot let any human relationship displace your relationship with God, ever. Keep a strong relationship with God. Don't invest the most, catch this, invest the most in your relationship with God and don't put somebody else in his place. God wants you to have a strong relationship with him so you can manage the relationship changes that life brings. God taught Jacob to cling to him, and when Jacob gets back to the promised land, look what happens. He got through that, and look what happens in verse 20. And there he erected an altar. When he got back in the promised land, he already reconciled with Esau, and then he left Esau, came back to the promised land, and erected an altar in Canaan, and he called the name of that place, of that altar, once again, in Hebrew, it's Elohim Israel. Elohim Israel. Remember when Jacob wrestled with God, Jacob changed his name from Jacob to what? Israel. Elohim is one of the Hebrew words for God. If you notice in all of Jacob's life, it's talked about where God is the God of Abraham and God is the God of Isaac. This is the first time, finally, you see these words, Elohim Israel, the God of Jacob, for the first time. And finally, Jacob gets to the place where he says, God, you are my God, and you are first. Can you say that today? Do you have a relationship with God? I'll tell you what, if you do not have a relationship with God, it is hard to change human relationships when those are the only relationships you have. If you don't have a relationship with God. You know, Jesus knows a lot about relationship change. He knows a lot. One moment on Palm Sunday, he was welcomed, everybody saying, hooray, hooray, you're the Messiah, you're the King. And yet, a few hours later, crucify him, crucify him. You think Jesus knew a lot about relationship change? Oh, yeah. Jesus was abandoned by everyone and left on the cross so you can have a relationship with an unchanging God. Do you have that relationship? If you have that relationship, you can get through all the other relationship changes in life. If you don't know God, if you just have questions and really just having trouble to follow it right now, it's okay. It's okay. Talk to me after the service. I'd love to just connect with you and explain how you can have a relationship with God. Those movies, Toy Story 1 and 2, not the only ones. In 13 years after the second, 13 years ago, rather, in 2010, the third Toy Story movie came out. Creative name, Toy Story 3. This time, a lot of time has went by. Andy was no longer a kid. He was all grown up, and guess what? He was going to college. And the whole movie revolves around what is Andy going to do with his toys when he goes to college. He's faced with a choice of what he's going to do. Of course, the toys are worried this whole time. They don't want their relationship with Andy to change. They didn't want to be thrown away. And the ending scene of the movie ends with Andy going off to college, and as he goes off to college, he stops and donates his toys to another child named Bonnie. It ends with Andy saying goodbye to his childhood toys. And then the toys begin a new relationship with their new owner, Bonnie, as you hear the song playing, You Got a Friend in Me. Relationships change. They change. But God designed your human relationships to change, so you'll focus on your relationship with Him, who never changes.